for truth.
Welcome to Duality Check, the podcast where two brothers embark on a journey through the realms of scientific inquiry, the mysteries of the past, and the uncharted frontiers of spirituality. Join us as we explore the wonders of our world and beyond, all while embracing the roles of curious bystanders rather than experts. Together we'll unravel the tapestry of existence, blending the dichotomies of knowledge and wonder. Get ready to question, ponder, and delve into the dualities that shape our understanding of reality on Duality Check. I'm Drew.
And I'm Dean, and welcome to episode number 63.
Where we have no plan, but we are going to show you some stuff and talk about some stuff, and we are going to have a good time. Either way.
Heck yeah. Yeah. So how's your week been?
Been good. Kids were not sick for the first half, and then they got sick again. Yeah, but nothing too major, just like sniffly.
It's a lot of back-to-back sicknesses going around.
Yeah, it sucks when they're in school age because then they're just
spreading it everywhere.
And daycare, and never get a moment to rest. And Rachel's sick too, so that doesn't help. So yeah. I've been trying to take on a little bit extra to help everybody get better so that I don't have to take on extra for too much longer.
Right.
But anyway, everything's been good. Outside of that, boys are still in high spirits. And
Nice.
How about you?
I joined a church this week.
That's right. Yeah, you did.
Don't say the name.
I won't. But it is a cannabis and mushroom church.
Yeah, it's a church that essentially is it's an open faith, and essentially the belief system is that entheogens or hallucinogenics were the original source of human spirituality, essentially.
Bringing us back to source.
Yeah, and as part of the church, you have access to church sacraments, which includes...
These ain't your average sacraments.
Yeah, which includes, THC and psilocybin and DMT, and which is cool, super cool.
Yeah.
You know what? I'll bring this up for later on the next segment, but they actually just launched their own podcast.
Is that right?
Yeah, and I just started listening to the first episode. So I'll link it to you guys if you're interested in checking it out. But they're talking about the use of these substances for like spiritual, development. But it's cool stuff.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, open faith, it's probably the best way to describe something. I mean, if you're going to start something like this, you'd want it to be open faith because you don't necessarily have to rely on like one deity, right?
Right. Well, the belief system of the church doesn't take a stand on what spiritual
path
you follow or believe in. Like their core belief is just that these substances are sort of the root of it.
Unlock
and give you direct access to interact with it. So
right. So you can come in with whatever sort of faith you already may have.
Yeah.
Or none, really, if you want.
And it helps that it's in Oakland because Oakland has done some decriminalization recently.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. But they're clearly they legitimately are using they have a bunch of literature that you get when you join that is talking about like how to use the substances in a spiritual way, how to get the most out of them.
Yeah.
How to safely dose and prepare and whatnot. They're definitely directing people towards a spiritual use, which is great.
Yeah, instead of just like open and just do whatever you want with it. And
Right.
Yeah, which is cool because I think whatever faith you might have or no faith, right? I think if you allow yourself to like embrace that journey, you may realize or come to some sort of understanding about our distant past, like what Brian Murusky talks about with like these old faith religions and how they were definitely dipping into some psychedelics with their mixtures of wine and all these different like barleys and like all these different like what was it, ergot?
Ergot, which is the fungus that grows on wheat, and it has a bunch of alkaloids in it, which include the alkaloids that were synthesized later on in the 50s or 60s, whatever that became the discovery of LSD.
All right. And then there's all like even within the Bible, like the burning bush, the acacia bush.
Acacia.
Like those are like DMT rich plants.
The Amanita muscaria. Well, plus all the non-drug ways to interact in that sort of spiritual manner. But it seems like the psychedelic route is a pretty reliable route to go down for exploring those other realms.
Yeah. So cool. Yeah. Dean joined a church.
Which I never thought I'd come out here and say.
Yeah. Probably one of the coolest churches you could have joined.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what I'm allowed to say and not say about it, but I signed paperwork saying like I'm not supposed to give away a bunch of information about it. So
gotcha.
Anyway, I've got some videos here for us.
Okay, do we want to start with our weekly Bashar? And then we'll dive into some of this other stuff?
Let's do that.
So this is, he at one point went through an EEG brain test. And this is Daryl Anka kind of talking about that connection of like science and like, channeling, which a lot of people don't say is not science. But anyway, we'll let this speak for itself here.
Sure.
The channeling class taught me to alter my brain waves to match Bashar's frequency. He does the same thing on his ship, and somewhere in the middle, our vibrations meet and harmonize. When they do, my body becomes like a biological resonator, and my personality starts to mirror his.
That's an EEG cap, and it's going to be recording your brain waves.
This is Janine Lamar Kalaba. PsyD, is that a psychology?
Psychologist, yeah.
BCN QEEGT. These are a lot of titles. I don't know what they are even. It says clinical psychologist, quantitative EEG technician.
That must be what all those things mean.
That's the QEEGT. Yeah, okay. I don't know what the BCN is.
As we measure various states that we'll be exploring today. And looking up here, we can see that each of the electrodes that we have hooked up on that cap have achieved a level of impedance that is accurate and that will properly record the brainwaves without interference.
In the beginning of the channeling, the channel was capable of holding on to, shall we say, or bringing through the idea of about 1.5 to 2% of our energy. In the ensuing years following the initiation of contact with the channel, it was thus then capable in the channel's body of expressing our energy up to about 3%. On average now, we are expressing about 5% of our total energy.
So we're looking at a picture of Daryl's baseline EEG. And what I've done is to record Daryl's baseline when he is not channeling and compare that to his EEG when he is channeling. Now here is a picture of Daryl's raw EEG, baseline again, in which we see a very rounded and rhythmic dominant frequency, we call it, in the posterior cortex or the back of the head. And this is a good finding, it's a positive finding, because it tells us that Daryl's nervous system is stable. and also that he has what we call good thalamocortical functioning. And this is a common feature, a characteristic that is found in individuals who are peak performers. So here we have a picture of what disconnects when Daryl begins to channel. And you can see the areas in blue, the functional Brodmann areas, we call them, that are not used when he is channeling. And it appears that he disconnects from his personal sense of self. He disconnects from the experience of pain. Now, what increases when he begins to channel is, first of all, his processing speed. And processing speed is a very interesting phenomenon because what happens is it develops early in childhood. And by about the age of 5 or 6, and certainly 9 or 10 maximum, we reach a set point. And this set point doesn't usually change during the lifetime. And in Daryl's case, it actually went up when he began to channel. And it increased when he listened. The actual frequency of the processing speed was tuned to an exact frequency all over the brain.
It says here the set point is stable and rarely fluctuates over the lifespan, but when Daryl channels, it changes in minutes.
Now we're looking at Daryl's anterior cingulate while he's channeling. And you can see the red areas there. There is actually gamma frequencies that I found in his anterior cingulate. And gamma frequencies relate to the higher mind. And gamma frequencies are often found in Tibetan monks and people who meditate a lot. To summarize sort of what I found here in Daryl's brain in comparison with the channeling state, he starts from a very stable resting state. And then he experiences changes that statistically less than 1% of the population would experience in the same way. He increases his processing speed. He tunes it exquisitely to one frequency all over the brain. And then he's able to create a resonant holding environment for the peak performance or the channeling to happen. He pumps energy into the right frontal cortex and the right auditory cortex so that he can empathize and hear very, very clearly. And because of the gamma frequencies in the anterior cingulate, he can shift gears. He'll be able to shift gears and navigate cognition, thoughts, and emotions very, very flexibly. And he'll be able to interpret from a higher perspective, from a more evolved place in his mind, much like from the highest mountaintop.
Interesting. There's no comments on this. Wow. I wonder what that's from.
I tried to find the full video of
from
that.
the documentary titled First Contact on Gaia.
Oh, that's the new one.
All right.
Yeah, that's why I couldn't find it, because it's on Gaia. It's behind a paywall, which we have access to, but I haven't actually logged into it.
Yep,
I'll have to listen to that.
We'll be using your Gaia this week, Amy.
Yeah, because I want to listen. I've been trying to find that whole video.
Yeah, no, they already, I started one documentary on him and never actually got all the way through it, but I'm really interested in checking that one out.
Yeah.
Cool. So, yeah, there seems to be some sort of interesting changes happening in the brain.
Mm-hmm. I found another interview of him talking about that experience of doing the EEG and like what it meant to him and like where he takes that, further. It's like,
What did he say?
and he was basically just saying like, I'll never be able to prove to anybody that I am actually channeling, another entity through me.
Right.
But what I can tell you is, what he can tell us is that, it's happening. Like he has worked through his channeling classes and stuff for a long time on the ability to. And it wasn't like he was searching for Bashar specifically, although that may have been the actual thing that was happening on a more, higher plane. He was just tuning his frequency to allow, like he was like trying
Reaching
to work
out and
where he's
allowing,
reaching out
yeah.
and to allow a certain frequency that he is a match with.
Right, like putting a call out like, hey,
Yeah.
who would like to communicate.
and who can communicate, right? Because
Right.
everybody has a
Who's
different
compatible,
frequency.
right.
Yeah. And that's like where him and Bashar started connecting. But in the beginning, it was like what Bashar was when during the channel in that video there, he was talking about how like at the beginning, it was very little of our energy that could come through. And then as Daryl grew in his ability to, connect with me, it got up to, what did he say? Like 3% was
He
the
said
max.
it started around
5%
3,
is
but it's
about what they're
got
got
up
now.
to about 5. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I wonder what that means is that because he's clearly like communicating pretty well. Does that just mean like how much control over the body he's allowed to have, or how much connection to his own body he's able to have
Or-
while he's connected to Daryl?
Or you think energy is like maybe like the memories and like knowledge itself, like Daryl having like if you go much higher, you could imagine if you get 100%, Daryl might just like become like have the memories and thoughts and the feelings and the full experience of what Bashar has gone through his entire existence too, right?
Yeah, I mean,
As far as his entire energy goes.
I was reading that as like this is the percentage difference between like if Bashar was here in the flesh and had control over his whole body, 100% control over his whole body versus how much of himself is able to come through Daryl.
Yeah, it's just the way he said it because of the energy part.
Yeah.
It's hard to determine what that means unless he explains it.
Right,
But,
right.
yeah, I mean, it could mean like his full physical energy too, because like your physical body has just as much energy, a lot of energy to it. So, but yeah, I thought that was interesting. I thought it would be a little bit of shake up from his just like prophesizing and
Yeah. Super
But
interesting.
I'm gonna listen to that whole
First contact
interview.
on Gaia. All right. I brought this video from Anton Petrov. And this has to do with the new experiment that's been done. There's been a long time search for like what gene is the gene that like gave humans language. And they essentially took the gene that they were suspecting was the one and applying it to mice.
Interesting.
Yeah, so let's check this out.
Person, this is Anton, and today we're going to discuss a somewhat intriguing and somewhat unusual experiment. An experiment involving mice that were genetically modified to have one single gene to be exactly the same as the one inside humans. And this produced results scientists are still trying to understand. And here this gene that generates a protein known as NOVA1 may potentially explain why humans can communicate the way we communicate and might have created our ability to produce complex ideas and to verbalize a lot of our thoughts. And so let's talk about this somewhat unusual but somewhat exciting experiment in a little bit more detail and talk about some of the potential ramifications. Now, as always, you can find the study itself in the description below, and here the study by Yoko Tajima basically focused on a somewhat unknown protein known as NOVA1. It's a protein that binds to RNA molecules encoded by the NOVA1 gene, and in essence sort of looks like this. And though like many other genes and many other proteins, it seems to be responsible for a lot of different functions, inside the brain it seems to be responsible for neural development. As a matter of fact, all of the previous studies about this gene were mostly studying this gene because it seems to be associated with a lot of different brain disorders, specifically when it has some kind of a problem. But by itself, this NOVA1 gene is also known as master gene regulator. You can essentially think of it as a kind of a master switch, and so any problem with the NOVA gene results in some serious issues. You can actually learn about this gene and its functions from one of the studies from 2014 that you can find in the description. But surprisingly, it does seem to affect at least 90% of all human genes in some way or another. But most of the interest in the last few years was really in regards to its effects on the brain, because scientists discovered that when it creates this NOVA1 protein, this can then rearrange sections of RNA inside neurons, making them form in a very different way, making them create certain structures and develop in certain ways. Here's another study from just 2 years ago that essentially discovers that it seems to regulate very specific activity inside hypothalamus, with any change to this protein affecting our brain and hypothalamus in somewhat serious ways. And so the overall conclusion from many of these studies is basically that this unusual gene changes how our brain cells seem to synthesize proteins and thus changes how our neurons develop. And one of the main conclusions here is that it seems to dramatically increase molecular diversity inside neurons. And naturally, because this gene is so important, it does not just exist in humans. As a matter of fact, it looks like most mammals, or possibly even all mammals, seem to contain NOVA1 inside their genes. And obviously, because this is a master gene, this should not come as a surprise. It would explain why so many mammals develop in very similar ways and even have somewhat similar brain structures. Except that there's a very small side note here. Of all of the mammals in nature, it looks like human NOVA1 gene has one tiny difference. It literally has a single amino acid that's different in human version compared to other mammals. Here, inside the position 197, the isoleucine amino acid has now been changed to valine, which, though might not be a big deal, completely changes the protein in humans compared to other mammals.
That in that image he was showing, the isoleucine or whatever he called it, that changed to valine. It was comparing on those two columns or the two rows, like Denisovans and another hominid species against
Humans.
Homo sapiens.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah.
At least in terms of its structure. And because of this bizarre difference, for many years now, some researchers speculated that maybe this is actually something that makes us very different, and specifically, maybe this is something that gave us speech. So for the past few years, NOVA1 has actually been the so-called language gene contender, because only humans seem to have this specific form. But this was somewhat debatable because previously, in a lot of different studies, a slightly different gene was a better contender. A gene we see right here known as FOXP2, or fork hat box protein P2. A gene expressed inside the brain, the heart, the lungs, and the digestive system that also exists in a lot of different vertebrates. And intriguingly, one of the experiments back in the days revealed that when this gene is introduced into mice, they actually start to speak differently, or technically squeak differently. This was reported back in 2009, and here the human version of this gene made the mice produce slightly different sounds. Although here it also produced some additional bizarre behaviors. For example, the mice were not as curious anymore, and did not feel as much joy because for some reason their brain was not producing as much dopamine. Nevertheless, this
Dude, imagine the human speech gene is like, the downside is, well, now you got to deal with depression.
Oh my gosh, right?
That's crazy.
Huh.
We made sad mice.
experiment and the study was actually exciting just because this was achieved and because it was now possible to test other genes just to see if we can discover this language gene and communication gene that in essence makes us human. Although when it comes to this FOXP2 gene, based on the analysis of Neanderthals and Denisovans, or essentially our cousins from back in the days, they also seem to have this gene as well, and it was very similar to the one in humans, which back in the days implied that maybe Neanderthals could also speak like humans. And one of the reasons scientists actually thought that FOXP2 was a language gene was because of the disorders associated with the problems inside this gene. Anyone that has a mutation in this gene very often has a lot of speech defects and is unable to move their lips and their mouth in order to produce any speech. Likewise, compared to other mammals, the human FOXP2 gene is just a little bit different, but is exactly the same as the one inside Neanderthals. And so this was thought to be the origin of human language. But naturally, this was just the beginning, and obviously scientists wanted to keep looking just to see if we can find other contenders or discover something else. And so 16 years later, we get a new study. A very similar experiment, but an even more exciting discovery. Because in this case, this NOVA1 gene is definitely unique to humans. Neanderthals and Denisovans did not have the same gene either, and it seems to be one of the few genes that pretty much all humans contain. Now here I'm saying almost because there is a very bizarre discovery. Researchers were able to collect anonymous DNA sequences from approximately 650,000 humans and discover this gene in almost everybody except for 6 people. Now because these were anonymous, we have no idea who they are, but for some reason out of 650,000 people, 6 contained a different variant. Obviously there's no explanation why and why they have this mutation, but it would be interesting to find out if this produced any kind of a problem with their speech. But based on the genetic analysis, we know that this gene is relatively new in terms of evolutionary times. Since Neanderthals and Denisovans did not have this gene, it must have evolved after the species split. And based on a thorough genetic analysis, scientists believe that it must have formed only a few 100,000 years ago, possibly even less. And so because of the novelty of this gene, it was obviously somewhat intriguing to discover what effect this has on humans and what effect it might have on these mice. And that's because mice, despite containing a similar gene, do not contain the same gene. This is really uniquely human. And to test this, scientists created genetic mutations that made these genes exactly the same as human genes, and then conducted two separate experiments, one involving pups and one involving grown-up mice. And even as pups, these mice were already doing something different. Compared to a regular pup, these genetically modified pups were producing frequencies that were much higher. Basically ultrasonic squeaks, but in much higher frequencies than usual. And for some unknown reasons, despite a lot of screaming, their moms seem to ignore them. Normally, when pups produce ultrasound squeaks, their moms come right away. But here, even at young age, these pups were already producing different sounds and thus communicating a little bit differently. But a much more intriguing discovery came from the mice that were already older. So basically, once these pups grew up and became older, they then went on their first date, or technically had their first courting experience. And surprisingly here, during courtship, these genetically modified mice were producing calls that were very different from a regular mouse. And though the frequency was exactly the same, the actual amount of squeaks was extremely different and much more complex. In other words, they were actually making sounds that were way more complex in terms of syllables, with the overall communication being longer and more diverse. In other words, I guess in human terms, their pickup lines were very elaborate.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So a couple things I wrote down during that was non-speakers.
Yeah.
The idea of these non-speakers, and out of 650,000, only 6 of them
Had
we
a
know
variant in that
had a some sort of variant in it, and that could play into the fact that there may be non-speakers or have some sort of speech impediment.
I think the incidence of non-speaking autism is probably higher than 6 in 650,000, but I don't know what those numbers are.
Maybe.
But that's an interesting hypothesis.
Yeah. And the fact that he brought up in one of his images there the fact that there is a mutation in the cortical basal ganglia, which is part of the brain that's having to do with speech, and that was also something that the scientist that was working with the non-speakers had said that there was a mutation in that area of the brain.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because like listening to the telepathy tapes, they make it clear, and I don't know, like I've only heard the telepathy tapes side of this. I'm not an autism expert or anything, so
Right.
Take it as a grain of salt coming from me. But my understanding from listening to that is that she's trying to give the impression that non-speaking autism is like severe autism is an issue with fine motor control. And that because of the difficulties with fine motor control, that's what makes speaking so difficult, because it is a very fine motor control. And that's why the spelling is so much easier, because it's more gross motor control to be able to tap a button.
Which they still have issues with their gross motor control in a lot of cases.
Right. So if your hypothesis was correct, that this was like that those 6 out of 650,000 were, say, people with non-speaking autism, then what is that? Then maybe that would point to this not being a language gene. Maybe it would point to it being a speech gene, because language is the ability to communicate through verbal ideas,
Right.
right? And just because you can't vocalize those things
Doesn't
through
mean
your
you're not having those thoughts.
doesn't mean you can't comprehend and communicate back through typing out and spelling.
like your brain is still able to have those thoughts. It's just your ability to communicate those thoughts
Right. So
in a meaningful manner.
maybe what this gene is actually pointing to is a sort of fine motor control that we developed over Neanderthals and Denisovans that gave us more fine-grained ability to make more nuanced
Ideas, articulated.
vocalizations.
Yeah. To be able to articulate more fine. Yeah.
Not the ideas, but like at the actual motor control of our vocal
Right.
cords. Give us the fine tonal capabilities.
Well, in that way, and in that way, you'd have a step up because you can communicate more complex ideas with
Right.
those fine motor.
It's like
controls.
giving an artist more paints
Exactly.
to use on his canvas, right?
Exactly.
Like if we have more and more fine
Yep.
control of our vocal cords, we can now use those colors to create more complex ideas.
Yep.
But it doesn't necessarily. They would maybe be correlated, but not necessarily causative
Right.
of like it's not necessarily saying that the brain structures weren't there for the capacity of language and communication.
But
Anyway.
having that mutation gives you a step, and it allows you to like fully use your brain. Whereas before you had those things, like you had the thought, but you couldn't communicate it. So it's basically, do you have the thought?
right,
Because you can never prove it.
right.
Having the thought afterwards is only provable by the ability to use that.
Well, if you can communicate in non-vocalizing ways, so like if they were to be able to find someone with a mutation in this gene,
Right.
and then we're able to test them, maybe they were limited in their speech vocalizations, but maybe they're able to type, maybe they're able to write. And so if the person can still have
A
fully
conversation, yeah.
symbolic, fully rich dialogue, just not through vocalization, then that would point more towards it being part of our ability to speak more. Not necessarily
Yeah, that's
our ability, not necessarily our capacity for language in the brain, right?
Right. Yeah, I
Like
mean,
the capacity for language is like the capacity for symbolic representation, right?
yeah. I mean, it brings me back to the idea of like how so many people talk about like our brains like the capacity our brains have is far more than our capacity to actually use it. So like the idea that maybe these gene mutations over time are just happening to give our brains the ability to communicate at different levels. So like we are fully capable of expressing ourselves in all these different ways, and telepathy and all these other things that are, outside the realm of like standard science, accepted science. But eventually when they become like non-speakers that have this ability to speak telepathically, if that becomes accepted however many years from now, and that becomes a new form of communication, it's not that we lose our ability to vocally speak, and maybe our brain has ways of categorizing different ways of communication. It's just that a mutation and eventually allowing the species, our species, to adapt and to grow in that direction will lead to us using more or unlocking more of our brain by having these mutations.
Right. Yeah. And so that's kind of why I was like laying out the ideas I had just there too, is because like if you go in the, telepathy route, and if you go off of, so like there's different speculations around this telepathy stuff, right? Like especially in different communities, like the UFO community, a lot of them associate telepathy with like future human evolution, right? But then others, like in some of the circles on the telepathy tapes and stuff, they talk about telepathy as maybe being something that we've always had.
That we all have and just are not using.
Well, in our modern use of vocalized speech and our modern preoccupation with like the physical world is like we're not paying attention to the fine subtleties needed to harness this like telepathic communication ability. But let's say you rewind back in time to Neanderthals, to Denisovans. Let's say they didn't have a particular genetic evolution that gave them as much of fine vocal cord control.
Maybe they
And so they only had very rough vocalizations, but maybe because of that, they were more relying on the telepathic communication. In which case, if there is communication through that, even if it's telepathically, you would still need language structures and a capacity for language. It would just be a different form of language, right?
Yeah. Well, it makes me think of like telepathy as more of a broad and wide-ranging form of communication, like almost like the internet, whereas vocalization and speech is more of like
a local
communication that you can do on a local, like it can be more fine and more, because even like the people who are speakers, like the example on the talk tapes that they gave where the guy moved on the, even he had a harder time communicating like fully to the, like it was more simple ideas, sentences,
right?
And some people get images, some people get actual words that they're hearing.
Right.
Like it's a broader way of communicating.
But then they talk about like teaching classes to each other on the hill and stuff, right?
Right. But that's the thing is like a lot of these people are all over the world.
Right.
So like it may be more effective to communicate that way on a worldwide stage where you can go into certain rooms or hills or whatever you may, categorize them as, to communicate with large groups of people or certain groups of people. But for day to day, it still may be better to verbally communicate. And maybe like, and even like,
or it's more practical for survival. For us as Homo sapiens, right? Like it allows us to stay engaged in this world and be specific about how we can work together to,
especially because
collectively survive.
Exactly, because especially if like everybody's getting a different form of telepathy, right? Because if you're a more visual telepathic and I'm verbally hearing somebody speak, those are going to interpret in our brains differently. And it might take one person a little bit longer to interpret what I'm telepathically saying to you, or to interpret it in such a way that actually is advantageous in a dire situation that's happening right now in the moment.
Yeah,
so say you're across the room and I need to speak to you and say, hey, there's a fire over here. We need to get the hell out. If I was to telepathically say that, maybe you get is an image of fire.
And you don't know what to do.
Yeah, or you get an image of fire in your head and you're like, now you're just looking around, freaking out, don't know what to do.
And you don't get the specifics.
Exactly.
Maybe it's clouded by emotion or fear or...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So as where it seems like there are applications for it, and it might be a better application, like there might be like broadly a better use, like a good use for it. It doesn't mean that in the future we're never going to talk again.
Right.
If we were to develop that ability.
Right. And it seems that language has a certain ability in creating vocabulary. Like if you can create a word is a symbol for a concept, right? For like a real world concept or a conceptual concept, right? And we are able to do things like rocket science by getting very specific with scientific, like a wealth of vocabulary, which allows precision in communicating so that larger groups of people can work on more and more and more complicated issues.
Right.
Which seems like...
And you can maintain the standard.
Right.
Because like I was saying, like the standard might be different for each person when it comes to telepathy because because it opens up all these different like sensory abilities.
Yeah. So verbal spoken language seems to be an adaptation that allows our communication to take on a more specific, detailed,
And standardized.
which seems adaptive, especially for us as social creatures who have no real like we're weak, we're squishy, we don't have claws. Like we only survive because we survive together and we use our brains, right? So that is a huge advantage for a species like us. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't also huge advantages to telepathic communications. But as we're starting to like take on this idea that that telepathic form of communication is real or possible, like I'm interested to see where the science goes as to what are its limits, what are its strong suits and weaknesses in comparison to spoken language.
Yeah. And I can see a future, especially if we're non-planetary or we don't have the same fears and we don't have the same biological needs as we do now, as that being the major form of communication, whereas you would only need to dip into verbal communication when it comes to, one-on-one secretive conversations, right? Like if you want to have like a conversation with one specific person about one specific thing, that's when you use verbal communication, because maybe you're able to block off that and even in the telepathy dates, they talk about how like, well, I don't know if it's specifically there, but like the idea of like, I think it was actually when Kai Dickens was on Joe Rogan's podcast, they talked about this, about what it would be like to be a telepathic society.
Right.
And how so many people are afraid of that idea because of all these like random thoughts in your head that you don't want everybody to just have access to.
Yeah.
And like, I would imagine if we were to develop that skill, you would be able to put up walls and to still be able to like telepathic communication doesn't have to mean they have full access to your mind at all times.
That makes me think of the Lacerda files. Our interview with the reptilian series, right, where she was talking about how humans don't have any real ability to protect their minds, but maybe that also comes from the fact that we don't even really acknowledge this as a legitimate form of communication.
Exactly.
It's not until you do and you start to explore that space and learn the rules of it and what it can and can't do that you can then learn what are ways that you can put up a sort of barrier, because she said that they have abilities to lock people out of their own minds, but that we don't.
And on the Hill, they talked about in the talk tapes or whatever it was called, they are protected on the Hill. These non-speaking autistic kids are on the Hill because they know they're protected by some sort of divine.
Yeah. Well, Kai was all worried about people being able to access it, and they were like, chill, Kai, we're good.
Yeah,
we got this.
Like they already have developed, they've been doing this their entire lives.
Yeah.
So they have the ability to put up those protective barriers to maintain their space.
So maybe if you're like putting your thoughts out there on a certain, kind of like tuning into like radios, right? Like you open up to one channel to like, maybe that's like the channel you open up for like public communication. Right.
Yeah. And the guy on talk tapes that she had talked to was one of her friends. He was putting out into the ether, right, that he wanted to speak to these, non-speaking autistic children. Like he was searching for it.
Right.
And he couldn't get there. It was like, many tries, or he just was in an empty space where he felt he was in a space telepathically, but that there was nothing there. And he was like, what am I doing wrong? Like, how do I get there? And basically he heard a voice that's all of a sudden said, relax, just breathe and you will be accepted into it, basically. Like, just don't force it. Don't try to force it. You got guidance from this like realm.
I think he said he identified it as one of the people he's worked with or knew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the voice he heard,
Yeah.
even though he's never heard that person's voice in real life, he heard it as in the style of what he
And
would
you just
assume.
knew it was that person.
Yeah. And he said, just breathe, just relax and get into it, and everybody will accept you into it.
Right.
I mean, there's so much to explore there.
I can
and
really kind of relate to this all a lot more now that I've like experienced these DMT realms and then like communication with that spherical God entity or whatever. I kind of get what they're describing by like there's just like a knowing comes over sometimes, and there's you know, it's really hard to express, but
with your vocal cords at least.
yeah, well, we don't have a lot of terminology for it. 'Cause
Exactly.
we're not open to this stuff, so
Exactly.
we're not defining vocabulary to help us
Exactly.
to help us examine these topics.
If we can get to a point where a large scale portion of society accepts these things, telepathy as a form of communication, we can get there. And you don't need words to describe it. You need feelings, you need images,
Yeah,
you need
right.
experiences. You don't need the words anymore. Like you don't, and
well,
that's where
eventually
you
you'll
talked
be
about
able
like,
to have the words. I mean, once we have
sure.
the concepts,
because
and
then
the
you
ideas,
can rationalize it within your own head and create those things. But
Yeah.
but once you have to get there
right.
first,
Yeah.
right?
Well, cool. This
So
has been,
cool.
This has been a good.
So cool.
I didn't think we'd go so far off on this one. This would turn into a good one to share.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll share this video. There's more to it. Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
I like him. I need to start watching more of his videos.
Dude, his videos are great. His videos are great.
yeah.
I think there's another one I saved.
Anton Petrov.
Yeah.
Go check him out.
Yeah, check him out. All right, we're quite over now. We're past 45 minutes. So let's take our first break, and we'll be back with more. This is Stevie Nader, and the song is called "Feel Everything."
This time
Enjoy. What a great title.
I've been fine, yeah, I've been fine since you walked on to find the light. I've been good, yeah, I've been fine. I contemplated the time it's taken to be persuaded to make these statements. I made my mind up since you've been tied up that I'll be good, yeah, I'll be fine. 'Cause your rule is my high. 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 Your rule. Your rule.
Welcome back.
All right. Hope you all enjoyed that song.
Felt it.
Such a great title.
Yeah. So Drew found that video he was talking about with Daryl.
Yeah.
You want to play that real quick? Or
Yeah,
should we do our...
let's play that real quick.
All right, let's do that.
It's really not so much about trying to prove that Bashar is real, because I can't do that.
Right.
What we did demonstrate scientifically, I think probably for the first time that I'm aware of, is that the channeling state is a true altered state. And so the EEG readouts were definitely demonstrating that a lot of unusual things are going on in the brain when people are in a channeling state. And channeling is a natural thing all of us do.
Right.
Whenever anyone is truly following their passion, they're not experiencing the passage of time, you're probably in a channeling state, which is, as we discovered in the EEG test, between 40 and 100 cycles per second in the brain, which is a state called gamma. And in that state, some unusual things are happening. One of the most unusual we found was when people are growing up and their brain starts absorbing information, it goes to a certain frequency point and it generally stops. And that's called the set point in the brain. And what that means is your brain is kind of like taking snapshots of reality at a certain rate. Now, mine in general was 9 hertz, 9 frames per second, which is a typical amount of, rate of absorption. That set point is, according to our science and everything we know about brain science up to this point, is not supposed to change over the course of your lifetime. And certainly, if it ever did change, it would have to take place over a long period of time or be instigated by some sort of brain trauma or some major thing that would happen to the brain to change that set point.
Right.
But what we discovered is that when I go into the channeling state, it changes in seconds and goes from 9 to 10 to 11 to wherever it needs to go to represent whatever it is he's either doing in terms of sending information through or listening to the information someone else is asking him about. And it actually goes higher when he's listening than it does when he's talking.
Oh, interesting.
And so one of the things the technician
Right.
took from that was that there is a higher focus, a higher concentration of attention given to when he is actually listening to someone talk, because he's assessing all of the things that are going on in that statement in terms of their emotional level, in terms of the real intention behind asking the question, and many other aspects. So there was that. One other unusual thing was there is a portion of everyone's brain that is responsible for processing your personality so that you can express yourself as the person you are. During the channeling state, that portion of the brain shuts off completely.
Oh.
So who's talking?
Right. So your personality's gone.
My personality is gone during that state. And there are many other things that are happening, including a very heightened sense of connectivity. See, a lot of people think it's actually a trance state. It's not a trance state.
Right.
It's a state of heightened connection. So that more associations are being made, more connections are being made faster. And so there is a higher rate of processing information, organizing information, and delivering information from a very, very precise, high level frequency. So many different things we were able to demonstrate are happening in the channeling state that are highly unusual.
Is this something you're going to continue to research?
Yeah, we will.
Further?
We'll look for other ways to, get that data.
Nice.
As well.
Yeah, looking forward to validating this special.
Yeah, well, again, as a state of being is what we're trying to show, and again, that everyone has the ability to do this, because if they can simply allow themselves to get into that state, it brings on a lot more creativity, a different perspective of things from a higher level, and it's very conducive to problem solving in a lot of different ways.
I think that was interesting, like the understanding of how the frequency goes up when he's listening to other people instead of just talking.
Right.
Because he's taking in all of it, all of the situation. He's taking in the person, their state, their mental state, as far as he can tell. the emotion behind the question, maybe trying to determine why the question is being asked, even though it's not being, like, they're not telling you why, at least not right during the question, right? Like, that makes sense. Like, you're trying to take in more information from the surroundings, so your brain is like activated at a whole different level.
Yeah, the one thing that confuses me about this is it seems to be a little bit contradictory in that he was talking about the gamma state, which is of even higher frequency than 9 or 11 hertz. So I wonder, is that just a particular portion of the brain that's operating at the 9 or at the 11?
Well, she
and
said
then overall the brain waves are in gamma, or like...
She said there was a particular part of the brain when we listened to the
that
other
they
clip.
were looking at for
there
the
was
set point?
Yeah, so like there was a particular part of the brain that was operating within the gamma range. Not the entirety.
But yeah,
of the brain.
no, he was right in this because, like, the trance state is like down, like lower frequency, like closer to like the hypnotic and the dream state. That's when your like brain waves are chilling out.
Yeah,
And you
they're
got
not as
like
active.
relaxation, then like trance, then like sleeping. Cool.
I think it's just interesting that there's actual scientists doing work on this too.
Yeah. What should we do next? You want to do our Marcus Aurelius for the week, or should we do our tarot card first?
Let's do Marcus. I got this one ready to go.
Okay.
It's pretty short, but I think it'll be thought-provoking. This is Marcus Aurelius. Let me find the chapter real quick. So this is book 4, page 48 in this adaptation. You have existed as a part. You will not disappear back into that which produced you, but rather you shall be received back into it by transmutation.
Say that one more time.
You have existed as a part. You will not disappear back into that which produced you, but rather you shall be received back into it by transmutation.
Interesting. So you're saying like when we die that we've like, well, as seems like he's saying a lot of things here. He seems like he's saying that like in the process of living, we have become a part, I think the way they're saying that, a separation, like, right? Like we've become a piece, like chipped off of the block of consciousness or whatever, right? But that when we die, it's not like we just disappear like a drop back into a pond, but that we go back in, join back
As
in
changed.
with it, changed.
With the changes.
Yeah, with the changes that we've accumulated.
Yeah, with the changes. So you're not necessarily going back into it the same person, the same entity, the same spiritual entity.
That's a really cool and interesting view on maybe what, like, because if there was ever a point where God was all that was, right? Where like the source consciousness was the one singularity, the one thing. How could anything come into existence if not by separating from it, right? Becoming apart from it, right? And then, so maybe that's like what it means, or like the birth of a consciousness, the birth of a soul, the birth of a spiritual being, right? Is to divide off, become apart from whatever source consciousness you started as. But then throughout your life,
throughout that process, you change.
You are transmuting what you are. You're differentiating yourself. You're adding your own unique personality, flavor, characteristics.
Yeah. Because
so that when you pass, you go back and rejoin it, but now you have new characteristics, and
you have dragged along all the parts of whatever it is you experienced, right?
Yeah,
like,
right.
If you imagine like the oneness, the whole, right, and you separating from that, like the act of separating and like going through whatever parameters may be set as far as that existence is told, every bit of that is you're even though everything is part of it, your experience is the fact that you are no longer experiencing existence as the whole.
Right.
You don't have the same thoughts and abilities and all these things. You have limitations set upon you. So you're gathering things from a different point of view.
Right.
So then when you can
creating
reemerge,
your own unique recipe of a consciousness that is its own unique little, snowflake.
Exactly. So
that
when you go back
becomes-
in, you are transmuting because you're gathering all the things that you have gathered throughout your entire existence, that part is no longer what it was in the beginning.
Or maybe he's saying that essentially what you're doing is you're changing that consciousness from which you came from when you rejoin with it after you die by contributing whatever you've developed.
Whatever knowledge you may have gathered, whatever.
Yeah. Once you go to rejoin it, it will now be different than when you split from it in the first place because you've contributed something new into it.
Well, both things could be true, right?
Right.
Yeah, both things could be true there.
It's pretty beautiful.
Yeah. That's why I liked it. It was short and sweet, but it was nice. It was,
Good one, Marcus.
yeah. And whoever translated it.
For sure. All right, so I brought this video. I thought it was pretty interesting and beautiful. I just randomly came across it. I was like, ooh, this is podcast material.
All right.
So it's the title of the video, The Prophecy of a Shaolin Monk, What Awaits Us as Humanity.
All right.
What's your feeling about the future? About the direction which we are going with the world, with all this tech, with AI, with social media that's isolating us? What's the direction we're going to? Is it optimistic? Is it pessimistic?
I think in all life cycles of every culture that ever lived on this planet, now I have to mention, probably people will misunderstand, but doesn't matter. I think this nature, this planet, everything about it can never be out of balance. The universe is never out of balance because the universe is simply not separated. Yeah? This is like the one statement. So even nowadays, if you have, or if we sense, something is shifting, something is bad, there's too much technological development, something is too much being outsourced. That is the one thing. But because things are being obviously so much outsourced, there's so fast technological advancement away from being human. This is why the force of other ones, in order to even more now push to the front again the realization of what you really are, this is also growing at the same time. So it is because of the technological advancement moving away from being a human. This is the reason why it's also connected to the fact of so many people right now having all these wake-up calls. So many people getting interested into this type of topics. What can I do to not outsource my life to all this technology? So this comes up because of the technology. The faster it grows on the one side, the more and deeper the understanding also becomes to the inside. And the question simply is, on which side are you standing? Or maybe you don't even need a side to stand on, because it's all connected. So it's neither optimistic nor is it pessimistic. In my view, it is really just like, it is a different experience that's gonna come, no matter in which way. It's a new experience that is just gonna expand the realization how much is possible in this world. You can go to the Mars on the one side, and on the other side, you can go into the deepest layers of what you find inside there, inside yourself. both of these methods are existing nowadays.
Wow, yeah. Oh. That is very
beautiful.
profound.
Yeah.
And also true, right?
Yeah. I just like his statement of fact up front that like the universe always exists in balance. Like it does. It's not that like people perceive us as falling out of balance. But he's like, no, it can't be out of balance.
Yeah.
That's not the nature of it. It's always connected. So if there is a move in one direction, there is a balance in the other.
Yeah. It's more of where your mindset is at, right? So if you're one of the people who feel or are so deep in the AI technological world and you're just all of your effort and focus is pushed in that direction, there are other people who are completely the opposite of you and are focused on their inner peace and their inner self, and they're trying to find ways to be more connected as humans, even more so than 200 years ago when we had no technology.
Right.
Because even those people, there was a balance there where there was some technology, lamps, gas, things like this. They were like, no, we don't need any of that. We got wood. We got things that we can do naturally. Like, we don't need any of that. Like, there was always a balance. And like, that makes so much sense that, and there is a whole counterculture to this technological boom that's going on.
Right.
There's an entire counterculture, and it's kind of the duality that we were talking about this entire time on this podcast
is about. Yes.
Like, we, as well as embracing the technology to make this podcast possible, we are also balancing the fact that we are trying and so deeply connected to and trying to become more deeply connected to what it is that makes us human, what it is that connects us all, what it is that makes us all so profoundly like connected, you know? Like, it's all, there is a balance in it all, and you can, like he said, you can be on one side or the other, or you can be on neither. You can be the one in the middle who sees both as positive or pessimistic, depending on your view.
I feel like firmly like dancing back and forth between the sides, right? Like, I've always been so connected to technology, and I see so much actual positive in it. Of course, I see the negative as well, but
sure.
This podcast has essentially documented a lot of my progress into the inner depths as well. And, it's interesting if you visualize this balance he's talking about as a yin yang. You can see how, like, if you go far off in the technological direction, that maybe there are spiritual truths to be mined there.
Yeah.
And if you go super far off in the inward direction, there are technologies to be found there.
Absolutely. Yeah, the tail is always in the mouth of the other.
Right. Anyway, yeah, I thought I would share that. I thought it was really...
I thought it was beautiful. Absolutely. That was a great find. Yeah, I think that just showcases, and that, to come from a Shaolin monk like that, which, some people don't care, but, obviously, but they have a way of being connected, and
you can just, I don't know, I just got such a strong vibe off of his demeanor and his body language.
And his message there too. Yeah.
The way he paused in constructing his thoughts.
Yep.
You'd see him like
very thoughtful.
Yeah, like really picking his words, and I thought it was great. I thought it was great.
I'd love to listen to more of him. Looks like there's more just based on the suggested videos that pop up there.
Master Shihang
Yi's teachings.
So, enjoy that one.
Very
I thought
cool.
that was cool. And we
Very
might
cool.
have to look into more of his stuff. He might have to become a regular.
No kidding.
That was some dopeness.
No kidding. The one I'm seeing is The Karmic Connections. Cut All the Karmic Connections is the name of another video there.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, we'll have to bring him back on.
All right. Drew, you shared this.
Yeah, so this is a potential. This is just an Instagram video documenting potential Lockheed Martin technological advancements for aircraft and the potential for maybe some of the UFO we may have been seeing in recent times. So.
This is ties into those metamaterials. Let's check this out.
This is going to blow your mind. Lockheed Martin has invented a technology for planes that allows the plane to literally change shape, grow, change color, charge itself without any wires, and also potentially fly autonomously, which for us sounds a lot like what we perceive to be UFOs. They've developed a technology called the skin of an aircraft, and it's not like your traditional paint job that's a protective layer over the plane. This acts like a living organism, and it can literally allow the plane to change shape on demand. It's more of a muscular material. So what happens is the plane has an intuitive ability to sense when the plane needs to change shape. So imagine it'd be like if you had a couch that sensed that you needed a nap, and so it changed into a recliner. This is all possible because of the plane's advanced sensors and data flow that are built into the skin using no wires. It is because of this advanced technology that the plane is also able to change color in seconds and also potentially fly autonomously. This is going to blow.
Okay. This is cool, but this person who is speaking here clearly doesn't have a huge grasp on technology. She's not using a lot of specific terminology here. Like it's a lot of generalities, but this ties into the the 38 nerds that we covered.
Yep.
That's sort of like metamaterials, and the shape changing materials.
But the application that Lockheed would come out with would be something similar to what the visuals we're seeing here.
Yeah, some of those visuals were video, but a lot of them were animation. So I'm not sure.
This one here is like what looks like potentially like some sort of prop plane, like a C-130 or something like that can morph into like a helicopter based on its needs. It gets low enough, or it has to maneuver in such a way that it can morph. And it can open up a hatch on the top that can change the dynamics of the flight characteristics. But then they got video like this.
Yeah.
That shows more of like a smart material that is actually like technologically.
Well, it looks like almost like screen technology on the skin.
Yeah.
I just have to point out this comment. I love it. We got Transformers before GTA 6.
Well, the GTA 6 comments on everything have been so good, man. Oh my gosh. I love it. I love it.
Oh, it makes me so happy.
I don't know if GTA 6 is ever coming out. So funny.
Yeah, I mean, we got video of it now.
So funny. I know, but still, that could be years away.
I saved this earlier too. Check this out. It's
Holy shit! What is that? I am. That's not a plane. That is not an airplane. You see it?
It's really bright compared to the stars.
Satellite, and that is not
It seems like it could be like a flare or something, but it's not.
But it's moving across the sky too.
It's so bright and it's not flashing much.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like that before.
And it's moving across and now downward. So it's like lighting up the trees though. There, you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, look at
Whoa.
that.
There's no FAA lights on it.
That's what makes me think it's a flare. It's
That was shared by Red Panda Koala. Well,
interesting.
That post was by Dr. Dan, and Red Panda Koala shared it. That's how I found it. No real info in the comments or anything, so I don't know what to make of that. But it's an interesting video.
To go back to the smart material, like the metamaterial stuff,
Yeah.
and the potential for like what we were seeing in New Jersey.
Right.
'Cause there's so many accounts of like changing shapes and like what looked like a standard drone starting out
There was a-
change into like a fixed wing.
I don't know of a lot of people who like claimed they saw the changing, but I know that there
Even
was
some of the video.
there was a lot of splits between people reporting fixed wings and people reporting like quadcopter style bodies. And then we shared that video of that one model drone that essentially like that transitions from like the helicopter to the plane.
Yep. And the fact that like if what that video was saying was correct, like the ability for these things to charge themselves and not need to dock.
Right.
They don't need
Which could
like
explain
no wires.
That could explain the ability for them to stay in the air so
for
long.
hours and hours and hours, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was at night, so you would have to presume there's using some technology other than
solar or something.
Like photovoltaics,
Yeah.
right? Like it's not using solar technology.
Mm-hmm.
So it must be absorbing. If it is absorbing energy through the skin, it must be from some source other than sunlight.
Mm-hmm. The
anyway.
ether. The ether's making a comeback.
Interesting. All right, cool. Well, let's take another break here, and then
We'll start off with a little tarot.
we'll do a little tarot.
We'll come up with a question here during
And
our
then
break.
I think I just want to share one of the videos we didn't get to last week with Joe McMoneagle. Not the Russian sub story because that's cool, but you can hear that a bunch of other places. But I want to share his story of his near-death experience because I thought that was fascinating.
Cool. Yeah, we'll chat about that a bit. Maybe we'll end a little early tonight, but yeah, we'll get into some tarot to start off our next segment. So
Enjoy this. This is from Soul Food, mine and Carla's band, and this song's called Resurrection. This is like a tribute to a song by Common. Common has a song called Resurrection, and to make this, we went and we found the same record that he sampled, and I sampled it again, just like how I think it was DJ Premier who did that beat for Common, but just like he did, but like kind of put my own spin and twist on it.
Nice.
And then Carla used a similar like rhyme schemes to Common too, but with his own twist on it. So it's a little tribute song. Anyway, so this is Soul Food Resurrection.
Yeah, welcome. You're now tuned into Soul Food Radio. And this is Resurrection. Shout out to hip hop, to Dilla, Primo, No ID, Common Sense. I go by the name of M. Born. Yo, I staggered in the lab again, possessed by my soul that's deep inside my abdomen. I let it fly like javelins over the globe with my vocals. I'm traveling, belittling, bedazzle them, the chosen one like Anakin, immaculate from Sacramento. I'm accurate on any instrumental. Now here we go against the grain while I'm fighting demons. Keep believing that no matter what they're saying, gotta keep on chasing 'cause you never know. Keep on dreaming. My heart is beating, breathing life into every line till they memorize every rhyme. Then I'll rest my eyes. I testify through my punchlines, cut like the lunch lines and touch the sky till the sun shines. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever make it home again. They say I'm too underground and I tell them thanks for noticing. I wrote this in my sleep, so in a sense it's ironic they've been sleeping on my music. Now we have something in common like resurrection. Resurrection. I ride the rhythm like a street bike, running through the street lights. I get hyped and rip mics took the wisdom from my windpipe. I've been dope, I've been nice, I'm insane, I ain't light. My pen game is skin tight, my wordplay is precise. I see life through the eyes of a child so innocent, young common sense, staring out through the picket fence. fins, resurrected through my pen. Grew up in the dirty slums, and every penny that I earn, I burn it like a purple one. Serving lunch, food for thought. I could've sworn I should've lost. Who would've thought I'd get across the other side and brush them off? Lock them down, martial law. Serving raw like sushi rolls. Young, hungry, humble, but the flow was almost few below. Super cold, I could've known some kid I know would put us on with the same music that we grew up on. Sing along, cue the horns, prove I'm wrong. Barging like a mastodon. Time tablet through my monologues like a vagabond. Resurrection. Resurrection. Resurrection.
Welcome back. All right.
Start us off with our random tarot poll here.
What intention did you
my
put in?
intention I put into it was, how can we and our listeners best connect using or allowing our fullest selves, like within our fullest selves?
Okay.
Interesting. The upside down death card.
Oh, very interesting.
You wanted to describe that for people while I look for it here?
Yeah, so we have a knight in armor with like a plumed helmet. His visor is up and his face is a skull. He's riding on a white horse. He's holding a flag that says 13, and it appears to have some sort of white flower. I don't know my flower, so I don't know what type that is. In the distance is the sun coming over the horizon between two towers. There seems to be some sort of spiritual being, like leader, like a bishop or something, pleading to the knight. There's a child and a woman on their knees, and what appears to be a king dead below the knight with his crown toppled off of his head. Pretty cool imagery. I'll save an image of it for you guys. So this is part of the major arcana. And this is card number 13. So the Rider-Waite-Smith website describes this card as, Waite gives the following meanings for death: end, mortality, destruction, corruption. Also, for a man, the loss of a benefactor. For a woman, many contrarieties. For a maid, failure of marriage projects. Reversed, inertia, sleep, lethargy, petrification, somnambulism, hope destroyed.
Interesting.
I find the death card far less dramatic than its title. It's simply the ending of something and the start of something else. In all, everything comes to an end at some point. Let us look at the card a little more closely. A bishop stands in front of death, and the king lies under death's horse. Death is a respecter of no one, and no one can escape it. The king has succumbed, as too will the bishop. again, it just means that everything ends. Death is different to the tower, in that death is something that you bring on, and the tower is something that happens to you.
Yeah, I like the idea, like, it's not as dramatic as it may seem, like we talked about before, like when you had mentioned it when we first did our tarot reading before.
Yeah.
Like the idea that, like, death is the inevitability of life, and death of one idea can be the birth of another, right?
Well, death is what gives way for life.
Sure. Exactly.
It is the dead trees in a forest that break down and create the nutrients for new entities to come into fruition. And
in conjunction, like, with my intention, how can us and our reader and our listeners best connect to our fullest selves?
Yeah.
And by death and rebirth, that idea of cyclical nature, like embracing the duality of nature. Like, you may have to lose part of what it is that holds you to whatever, like, dogma, to embrace another part, another aspect of what is coming out of you.
Yeah, so I wonder, this is not the same type of reading that, like, you get for the death card in the Darkwood. They have this more sort of transitional read on it. And I forget what their description for the reversed death card was. But yeah. Amy, what do you think this means in this context? Anyway, that's interesting. Cool.
Yeah, I think it is more transitional. That is cool.
All right. Let's hop into this last bit that I wanted to share from the Joe McMoneagle interview of him talking about his near-death experience.
Let's do it.
So I want to get into some weirder stuff because you've made headlines for remote viewing Mars, for example.
Yeah.
A million years
ago. That was a
ago.
DoD target, by the way.
So explain the context. Well, how is that a DoD target?
Well, one of the things that they found out is that I was having spontaneous out of bodies since my near-death experience in 1970. I've had multiple near-death experiences, but that one was really profound.
Was this falling out of the helicopter?
No, this was being poisoned.
Poisoned?
Yeah, I was delivered DOA to a clinic in Passau, Germany from Austria. And I had not had a heartbeat for almost 40 minutes.
What?
Now, I'm not going to tell you that my heart wasn't beating for 40 minutes. It could have been beating once every 5 minutes. But it was enough to keep me alive, okay?
Oh, my God.
When I got to the clinic, the doctor there saved my life, basically. Yeah, I got transfusions, a whole bunch of stuff, but I was comatose for 20-something hours. And I suddenly sat up. I became conscious, and I sat up. And the German patient in the room with me looked at me and ran out of the room. He went out like a scalded duck. I looked at him, and I said, "God's a white light. You can't die, so chill." And out the door. I found out later when I looked at him.
You said God's a white light.
God is a white light.
Wow.
You can't die. And he looked at me and freaked and ran out the door. Later, he said, when I looked at him, my eyes had turned crystal blue and I had fire coming out of them.
No way.
Yeah, that's what he said. So the doctor came in and I turned to the doctor and I smiled and I said, "Oh, I'm still here. You know, God's a white light. You can't die." Well, he sedated me. I went back to sleep on the way driving to Munich. They took me to Munich, Germany, put me in a rest home. That's when they told my wife, my first wife, that I was still alive. For almost a week, she thought I was dead.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah.
Do you remember? I mean, you're coming out of this experience saying God is a white light.
Yeah.
You can't die.
Yeah.
Do you remember that as being sort of a conversion experience? Did you feel a sense of divine contact?
It was so profound, I just can't tell you. when it happened, I was getting ready to eat a dinner with my wife, who they had brought to meet me. We were going to stay a weekend in this guest house. And then she was going back to quarters and I was going back to work. I can't tell you what I was doing, but I was going back to work. And the guy that brought her was my friend that worked for me. So he brought her there. He was going to leave, and we talked him into staying and having dinner with us. And then he was going to leave, and we were going to stay there a couple of days. Well, we had before dinner drinks. When I drank part of the drink, I started feeling like I was going to projectile vomit.
Oh, no.
So I didn't want to be in the restaurant doing it. So I said, excuse me, and I headed for the door. And I was in a rush. When I hit the door, it was a swinging glass door. When I hit it with my hand, it was like somebody snapped their fingers. And I was standing outside on a cobblestone road with my hands out like this. And it was raining. It was like one of those soft summer rains, And the rain was going through my palms. And I went, what the hell? And I looked up, and there's this figure half in and half out of the door. So I drifted over there, and that should have been a giveaway, by the way. I drifted over there, and as I was going over, my friend came out, pulled me up in his lap. Back then, there was no such thing as CPR. So he started punching me in the chest and yelling at me, breathe, And every time he hit me in the chest, I was in my body in excruciating pain, looking up at his face. And I was trying to say, stop. And about the time I get the stop out, I'd be back standing on the cobblestones watching. This happened like 4 or 5 times. And then I stayed out and I watched. And he got up. My wife dropped to the pavement with me. And then he showed up with my car and put me fireman's carry into the back seat. It was a little Bug, a Volkswagen Bug. And they took off. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. So I'm like zipping along beside the car. Back then, they had to go through 2 checkpoints, Austria to Germany, which meant running the checkpoint, which they did. And drove a little ways, and then went out and then back in again because they had to get to this city called Passau, which is down in the southern tip of Bavaria. And he got me to a clinic. And when they got there, it was just getting dark. Just getting dark meant it was around 7:50, 8 o'clock. He picked me out of the car, fireman's carry. He's a huge guy. And he carried me to the door of the clinic, and it was locked. And I'm standing there watching all this. And I'm like, well, that's weird. Why would they lock the door? Maybe I'm dreaming. And he started kicking the glass door. And the inner door opened, and the doctor came out with the keys. What I didn't know is in Germany, at 8 o'clock, they lock all the doors. So you go to an emergency room or clinic, you get in by ringing a bell. Well, he had me in a fireman's carry, so he's kicking the door with his foot. When the doctor came out, he was in a wheelchair. I went, oh, man, it's getting better every minute. Why would a doctor be in a wheelchair?
Yeah.
Well, it turns out he was partially retired, and that's how he made extra money. He fell in with a nurse at the clinic. So I watched him carry me in. He dumped me on this table in the emergency area, big bright lights overhead. And they started cutting my clothing off and sticking tubes in me and whatnot. And I got bored. I started drifting away from the table, and I felt heat on the back of my neck. And I thought, this must be the light, one of the bright lights I'm bumping up against. And when I turned around to look, I was enveloped in this extremely intense white light.
Oh.
It was like perfect.
Did he feel love?
Oh, nothing but. And I had no fear. Everything went away in terms of threat. So I'm floating in this white light, and I could see perfectly. I thought at first, this is really bright, but it didn't hurt my eyes. And I thought, oh, this is it. This is like, where I want to be. And this voice in my head said, you can't stay. You have to go back. and I started looking for something to hold on to. I didn't want to leave, and that's when I second snap of the fingers, and I sat up and looked at the German patient and told him that. Wow. So it was very profound. I stopped carrying a gun. Nobody would work with me.
Why?
Because they thought if they got in trouble, I couldn't do anything. And
Did it turn you more into a pacifist or something?
no, not pacifist. There are something, I took martial arts from age 14 to a few years ago. And so I don't need a gun. I can defend myself pretty well, and, unless they have a gun. But if they have a gun, your chances of defending yourself are minimal anyway. Anyway, I just stopped. Didn't want to hurt anybody. It turns out, since nobody would work with me, I had to work alone. And working alone, everybody was terrified of doing that. I didn't care, because dying is, so what?
So that's just changed your life, death, and
you can't cease to.
You can't cease to exist.
Yeah.
God is a white light.
I experienced God more as like an organic, ever-shifting, fractal, organic sphere, but I feel what he's talking about too.
Yeah. It's so fascinating, like the idea of like near-death experiences and like out-of-body experiences and like what he explained there, like described with his experience being poisoned of all things.
Yeah.
Like it was like a mixture of things, like being there, not being there, experiencing, the physical sensations, but not being in his body.
Yeah, the out-of-body experience that comes along with some of these near-death experiences is very, my mind just goes to Doctor Strange.
Yeah.
You remember that scene where he gets, he's like having his first like fight with like the bad guys, and like he gets stabbed and he like teleports himself to the hospital, and then she's like working on him and he like pops out of his body and he's like having this fight scene like in the hospital in his astral form.
So crazy.
But yeah, it's a very common thing in near-death experiences that people report being able to like witness what's happening in the room that they're in.
Yeah, and it's also pretty typical from all the ones that I've listened to and heard, like the idea of like feeling nothing but love and like having this like experience of like afterwards not having any fear of death because you've experienced what it's like. And you no longer fear it because there's nothing. I mean, obviously there's probably more than what you experienced in that moment, but
yeah, well, that relates. Let me do a quick tie-in. Amy texted us this week. She said, wait, where's the one she sent to both of us? Yeah, she's like, great episode, guys. Loved the river flow example you gave. So good. Dean, your voice sounds lighter and happier after your DMT experience. Do you feel that? And I replied back to her. I was like, yeah, I really do. Kind of an existential weight off my shoulders. And I had told her I had a sort of intellectual belief in the afterlife beforehand, but this was the first time I had like a powerful experiential, something powerfully experiential to root that belief in.
Yeah.
Right. Like now it's not just like an intellectual idea that where I thought my way to the afterlife making sense. Like it's one thing to think your way there and be like, that makes sense. It's a whole different thing to like
experience something that makes it more real.
Experience something that gives you faith and confidence that like, okay, well, I know it now. I've experienced it. Right. Like, and, yeah, I said, didn't know how much stress I was carrying over that. Everything seems a lot more chill and peaceful now. And yeah, that's basically been my experience over these last, few weeks. It's just, everything's cool. Everything's okay.
Yeah.
So it's harder to get stressed. Like it's just
You have a higher threshold for like the stress making.
It's
to make
just
yourself
like
stressed out.
It's just like it's just like a breath, like just like
Big breath.
just a
Big
relief.
Yeah.
You know, like I think part of this whole everything that led up to this podcast and part of like everything I've been into that's led up to it has been me searching, because I think deep down I had this like really core anxiety about it, you know, about there not being something on the other side. And I don't think the intellectual grasping of it is enough to assuage that anxiety.
Well, and it can be a block in a sense too, because you may have gotten yourself there intellectually, but you know that you were the one to have told yourself that. Whereas you experience something outside of yourself.
Yeah. Well, you always have the doubt in the back of your head that like maybe
you missed something.
Maybe you missed something, right? Maybe you interpreted something wrong. Like maybe you read the details wrong, right?
Right.
If it's on an intellectual basis, but when it's on an experiential basis, it's
especially being blasted out of your body and being having the experiences that you described and and that other
and like what he's talking about,
can
just the pure, powerful, like embodiment of like peace, love, and joy that like comes into you. It's just so comforting.
Yeah.
And to know that that's like there waiting for you.
And like, you know, that's home in a sense, right?
Right. It felt so familiar.
The reality.
I felt like I remembered it, you know?
Yeah.
So I can relate to what he's talking about here. I just didn't experience it as a white light.
So fascinating.
Yeah.
It's a great story of his. Yeah.
Yeah, we need to do some more near-death experience stuff. I don't think we've done enough of that yet.
We've definitely done some, yeah, but we should definitely like pick some really good stories and like pick them apart and really talk about them and stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe find a handful of them and do a whole show on it. I think that would be really fun. Because I think that stuff is very fascinating.
Yeah. Well, cool. Do you got anything else, or?
I got nothing else. I think we had a good one here.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you all for listening. And if you guys have any experiences similar to what we have described or shown or alluded to, please hit us up at host@dualitycheck.net. That is our email address. If you want to check if you guys want to get everything and all of it all in one place, go to our website, dualitycheck.net. If you guys are listening on any of the podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts or anything like that, like, comment, rate us if you have the opportunity. And all that stuff helps us out. If you guys want just the video content and you guys can listen along, we go YouTube or Rumble for any of that.
Hit us up with a like and a subscribe and some comments on there. Get engaged. It all helps the algorithm notice us.
Exactly. And it'll get other people interested. If you guys want to share it with your buddies, please do. All that is welcome. We
love you forever for it.
We want to create a community here where we can have these conversations with a lot of different people. So, Greg, I know you didn't comment this week, but we're going to get that Discord up and running and we'll be able to have conversations in person soon, hopefully.
Heck yeah.
If you guys want to find out when our
maybe we can even incorporate some like call-in segments through that. That would be cool.
I think we could definitely do that. Yeah. Well, we could have people waiting in the lobby and just have them bring them in. Yeah. For sure. But yeah, we drop our episodes on Tuesdays usually, but you can find that out on Instagram and Facebook. You can follow us along and like those pages. That'll help us out as well. Thanks for hanging out with us this week, and we'll see you next
time.
All right. Later.
Adios.